Hello, my name is Megan, and for my behavioral neuroscience project one, I'm doing what I'm calling a step to recovery. And what that is my hypothesis is if we increase neuropeptide Y, which I will be referring to as NPY, its effects will counteract the effects of alcohol consumption by administering a viral vector of NPY into the central nucleus of the amygdala. And I will explain what all that means in my next slides. So the reason this is important is because alcohol consumption affects over 29 million people, which is almost the population in Texas. And cutting off the supply for alcohol, it can be very stressful and anxiety inducing, which often leads to failure to quit. So how we're going to do this is with a viral vector. So for what a viral vector is a gene therapy of removing the DNA in a virus and replacing it with our chosen DNA, and that will cause a change reaction within the brain. And this will be happening in the amygdala because it is where our emotion, our fear is at, which is fight or flight. And with withdrawals, alcohol induces anxiety like features like fear, which is can be found in the amygdala, which is why it's targeted. So neuropeptide Y is an endogenous and anxiolytic compound, which means it created in the body and it's anti-anxiety. However, while we mammals carry it, NPY is typically in very low amounts. So what it is if we increase NPY, we will decrease the effects of stress and anxiety. So the more NPY, the less anxiety. And for in this case, the more NPY, the less withdrawal anxiety effect of alcohol we will have. So, as mentioned, alcohol with withdrawals, it causes anxiety. And because people um, typically don't know how to react with all that anxiety kind of hitting them at once, they relapse. So it's a constant circle of a high from alcohol and then they withdraw causing anxiety, and then to counteract the feeling of anxiety they go back to alcohol because how they felt in the beginning. So the bigger picture is that if inducing alcohol intake in rats to then have them have an alcohol deprivation cycle um, will intact a like it will cause them to like have withdrawal symptoms from alcohol, and then we will administer a viral vector to see how the anxiety patterns change. And the purpose of this is to examine the effects of alcohol intake and deprivation with the viral vector providing overexpression, which is what we want because the more NPY you have, the less anxiety. So the materials we had a sample of 16 male Wistar rats, and they were single house with a 12-12 light dark cycle. So 12 hours of light and 12 hours of night. And then they were given a option of two water concentrations. One had a decreased of saccharin, which is artificial sweetener, and that just kind of makes you more thirsty. It's often with sweet tea you kind of feel more thirsty from it, and that's because of the artificial sweetener. And then the second one had that also, but an increased concentration of alcohol. And then to avoid a bias, they changed the positions throughout the day. So that alcohol liquid diet is something that they perform and they call it a boost, and it's essentially vitamins, minerals, and ethanol, and it's a low concentration but highly diluted. So this is what their deprivation cycle looks like. It's very like intense, but they had two programs, a 12-week that had a 4-week baseline with those two concentration, followed by that boost liquid diet. And they went on and off between deprivation and that water concentration. And each time they had a higher deprivation. And then they had a surgery with 1 week recovery. And then post surgery, they had a 5-week water with 4 72-hour deprivations and then the week absence. So this is kind of what that looked like in a more of a picture format. So you can see like where the 72 hours is with those like kind of stripe features. You can see where the big deprivation periods are, and then your weeks without deprivation, which is when they had the alcohol concentration. So the viral vector was from a Synbis virus. They took the DNA out and replaced it with the chosen DNA that was RNA coding for MPY and GFP, which is our green fluorescent protein, which is how we're going to see our NPY. And this took 4 days and 3 hours. So the surgery process, they were put under, and then the viral vector was injected into the central nucleus of the amygdala, and then they had a week period of rest. To measure the anxiety, they had an open field that was measured with 25 squares, 9 centrals, 4 corners, and 16 peripherals. They had a 10-minute interval with a red light condition that would initiate the active phase, and they would measure like what they would do in terms of like grooming or like digging, and also how quickly they ran. So for the results, the viral vector was highly localized. A and B was like the first week post, and you can see how prominent those NPYs. But as it continues, the CD is 2 weeks, and then the EF is 4 weeks post. Those NPYs become less visible, but that is from the GFP not being as prominent. So, with their alcohol intake, it had a diet intake increase. So they constantly went to the concoction that they had, both the alcohol water concentration and then their boost that they had that had ethanol in them. And then at first there was no like immediate effect of withdrawals from the first 72 hours. However, with the longer deprivation, it showed elevation in anxiety and withdrawal symptoms. So the overexpression of NPY, it significantly decreased alcohol intake. So they were not going to the alcohol concentration that they had. They also weren't going to the water intake, but they significantly decreased going to that, and that can be seen in this picture. Your control is these are the ones that got a viral vector of just GFP, so it had no effect, and then they had the ones that did have the NPY. You can see the steady decrease. This is their anxiety results. So they had an effect on latency, which is the delay, but they were not going to corners, which makes sense because if you're having like an anxious attack, anxiety attack, you're wanting to like kind of curl up and stay like kind of in a close corner. They weren't doing that. They were not like excessively grooming them or digging or like running in circles. They were just more calm, more of their nature. It had no effect on their physical appearance, so no skin fell, no fur, or no fur fell, no skin like had red spots. There's nothing that affected their general physical and health and appearance. So, in conclusion, increasing NPY in the amygdala will cause an overexpression that can suppress withdrawal symptoms from alcohol. And this is extremely important because it can help people who struggle with alcoholism from relapsing, which has a 60 to 80% relapse rate. And we can see from this study that deprivation cycles do not help reduce alcohol intake, because if it is an option, they're more likely to relapse and go to that. So this shows that if they if they have an overexpression of NPY, they are less likely to have withdrawal symptoms of anxiety, which is what causes people to relapse. And then these are my references.